I'm very happy to be part of this event where we are actually doing academic writing workshop in an online mode. There are many firsts that we must acknowledge here. This is the first time I'm doing an online workshop, and first time that I've always been doing academic writing and literature review sessions for research scholars. But for the first time, I'm doing it for a 3.5-day program. Then I think it's also my first to do something on WebEx. One has been using Zoom quite a bit, but this is the first time we're using WebEx, so that's another first. Then in terms of 22nd June, for me, it's quite an important day because this is my work anniversary day. In 1988, on 22nd June, I joined TISS as an assistant professor. Soon after, I submitted my thesis at IIT and I joined TISS. So it's now 32 years since I'm in TISS, and and this is my first job, and I continue to be with TISS. I think having a workshop on academic writing is extremely useful for everybody, including students who are doing their master's degree, students who are doing their MPhil, PhD, and for faculty, because there is so much of emphasis that is placed on writing and writing well and being able to publish in good journals. And if you were to look at the recent NIRF ranking, the national ranking framework that's been developed and institutions have been ranked, research is a very large component for getting a good weightage and also getting a high ranking. For an institute like TISS, where we have ranked very well, in fact, our research ranking still is not as high as we expect it to be, because TISS has always been an institute that lays very high emphasis on outreach work, also a lot of public policy work and advocacy work. And within the NIRF ranking, in fact, that doesn't carry much weightage. And it comes under what is called as perception and outreach, and within that, the percentage is very low. So as a strategy, practically every individual and also every school and every institute needs to develop a framework as to how do they encourage their faculty and how do they encourage their research scholars to publish. For research scholars, I don't know about most of the institutes from where research scholars are coming, but it's a UGC norm that you have to publish at least 2 papers in refereed journals, and only then you can submit your thesis, right? So which means gone are the days when people can write their dissertation and submit. There has to be an external validation to your research work beyond that of what your examiners would give as report. The way I have structured this presentation, is first I'll be looking at what is the context within which we're talking about academic writing, and how do we factor in all the concerns that often come up in this kind of context. Then I'll be talking to you about what does writing and publishing contribute to. Means beyond things to do with your career, there's much more that happens when we write and publish. So I will talk about what does it actually mean when we write and publish. And then often writing, or let's say any writing, is very closely associated to reading. So I'll be taking into looking at what is the relationship between reading and writing. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'll share with you what are the key elements of reading and what are the key elements of writing, because this becomes foundational to be able to do good, solid, rigorous writing, and also be in a position where you can publish in reputed journals. So basically, welcome into the new world where teachers don't see their students and students can choose whether they want to see their teachers or not. Okay, so most of us are going to get into this online mode of teaching, and we have to basically survive this at least for some more time. Okay, so within what context are we talking about academic writing? So the first thing is that of course, I'll talk about what are the different kinds of writing and then talk to you about what is the context of writing. Fine. So creative writing is one major genre most of us know, and creative writing is definitely much more exciting for people to read. Professional writing is often referred to a lot of workplace related writing where organizations have to do a lot of communication. So that often is called professional writing. You also have a lot of writing that people do on internet. There are blogs that people write. It could be travelogues, they could be food related blogs, they could be sports related blogs. There is a lot of organic farming blogs. So a lot of writing, and there's a proliferation of writing that's happening on the internet. And very often those are quite crisp and concise kind of writings because it's linked to how much of attention can people pay to when they are scrolling down and reading. So nothing beyond 800 words, 900 words is acceptable in that kind of writing. Then you have another genre of writing, which is the commercial writing, which is again a lot of the writing that happens, newspaper writings or script writing for films and TV shows, or writing text for different kinds of advertisements. So a lot of that is commercial writing. And then you also have a lot of popular writing that people write, short, crisp, popular writing, which could be in print media, which should also be on the internet. Very many of these are also defined differently by different people. You'll also look at people calling them as exploratory writing or creative writing. So there are different terminologies used for describing different genres of writing, and probably their objectives in terms of whom they're trying to reach out and why they're reaching out for could all overlap. So a lot of this doesn't necessarily qualify as writing, right? So when we often refer to as academic writing, definitely this is like academic writing is linked to adhering to standards of writing, is also linked to having solid evidence base to back up what you're writing. It's not supposed to be heavily opinionated, etc., etc. So academic writing also is often used by people to put down somebody when they say that your writing is boring, or your writing is very prosaic, or your writing does not hold our attention. Sometimes they simply say, oh, yours is very academic. So for everybody else who subscribes to writing which is popular and not necessarily academic, then academic is definitely not so exciting. It can be monotonous and it can be boring. For example, very often when you will hold a research paper and want to read it, particularly a lot of research papers with postmodernist language, after reading the first page, you almost feel like falling, you feel like sleeping, going to sleep. Whereas you take a racy novel of 1,000 page, probably you will just sit through for 3 days and finish a 1,000 page novel, So there's a very different way in which they attract your attention compared to the way academic writings necessarily don't attract your attention. So in fact, you have to cultivate an interest in reading academic papers and also engage with it attentively in order to be on course in the academics. So in terms of different kinds of writing, that's what I have put forward. Okay, so within what context are we talking about academics, or academic writing is something that's very important. So here I put an interesting cartoon which actually says, we often refer to a term called post-truth. You will often hear words like fake news and post-truth in current times. And what do we mean by post-truth? The idea of truth does come from a philosophical foundation, or let's say comes from the philosophical traditions of science and comes from the philosophical tradition of positivism. where the understanding is that, uh, you know, society is there, out there, truth is out there, and you, with using the right scientific methodology, you can actually carry out research and understand what is truth. Okay, so which basically means that entire scientific endeavor expects you to carry out research in order with scientific tools and measures, and be able to capture what is truth and be able to then write what is it that you have observed as truth. Okay, so a scientific method basically then will prove something as a truth only after carrying out a scientific research. However, as opposed to that, if everybody has a very clear opinion and they say that they know what is the reality, they know what is the truth, they know what are facts, then without really having gone through a scientific methodology, using a scientific methodology and carrying out a research, in a scientific manner, then people often will say that this is post-truth. So you will have people having lots of views about health, lots of views about diet, lot of views about exercise, lots of views about, every aspect of our life, right? However, if you were to look at what is the source of all this knowledge that they have, and what is the source of all this information that they have, very often it's simply like Google. Okay, they've used Google and got some information. Or lot of people also have a lot of their knowledge building that comes with what we often refer to as WhatsApp University. There are all these forwards that people are reading, so everybody knows about COVID-19. Everybody knows, practically everything. Everybody seems to be having a view which they put forward as a scientific view, and therefore these are often referred to as post-truths, in the sense views that are not validated, views that have not gone through any kind of scientific reliable techniques of doing research, right? So we are in that kind of context where we have to progress with our attempts to do research with objectivity and acceptance of a variety of subjectivities, and then put forward what we have observed within this kind of academic ethical context. And however, the challenge is the broader context is surviving with a lot of post-truths. Okay, so you have here interesting cartoon where you have Democritus who says, I think, therefore I am. There is a recognition that there is a value to thinking, and there's a value to validate that you exist because you have feelings, you have emotions, and therefore you know you exist. Okay, so there is a methodology that you follow to arrive at this conclusion that you exist. Whereas there could be the post-truth understanding, which simply would be, I believe, therefore I'm right, and therefore I exist. That's the kind of context within which we are doing academic research. The next context that I would like to also allude to is the information overload context. Very often when we ask students, for example, to write an assignment, the first thing that they do is they'll ask for a topic and they go and they just sit at their own desk and chair and Google on their phone and get the first article on their phone and read it up and write up their assignment. Okay, and we often have to tell them that this is not acceptable, because we're actually expecting you to read textbooks wherever necessary and read published articles to write your assignment. And in fact, I also insist that my students submit a concept note on their assignment along with a list of papers that they're going to be referring to write that particular assignment. So when there's a lot of information overload, what we notice is everybody thinks that everything is there at the click of the mouse or at the tip of their finger. So there is really no problem to work very hard. You can get through because you have so much floating around. However, this itself is a challenge, because if there is so much floating around, what do you know is really the valid kind of information? How do you know what is really verifiable? what is really authenticated, what is really ethical. A lot of these questions then become important for researchers to actually use as a kind of assessment framework or a validation framework for the information that they look at. A little later, when I also talk to you about critical reading, I'll come back to this concern around information overload. But basically, this is again another very important context within which we are expected to do academic reading and academic writing. Okay, so having a lot of information is a boon in itself, but can also be a huge barrier in not knowing how to go about sifting through what is available and picking what is really appropriate. Okay, so that's the second context within which we are talking about academic writing. Now, the third part, the third aspect that I want to bring to your notice is competing interests, poor time management, and FOMO. Most of the young people here know what is FOMO, but senior people like Professor Dev would want to know what is FOMO. FOMO actually means fear of missing out. Okay, the huge anxiety that if I'm not on social media, I'll be missing out something. If I'm not on Instagram, I'll be missing out something. If I'm not on Twitter, I'll be missing out something. So at every point of time, young people, that could be including, research scholars, including young faculty, including me very often, whenever we are sitting and working, we also have our phone that's continuously blinking, sending out messages, live streaming a lot of new articles that are coming in, having beeps for breaking news, information being put out that somebody has liked your picture, how many people have liked your picture. So there is a lot of competition on your attention and on your time, right? So there are competing interests which go beyond academics, and then we have lots of things to be achieved at the same point of time. For example, during these COVID times, many of us have to factor in a lot of time to do domestic work. Okay, right, from cooking, cleaning, washing. We are a 4-member family, and all of us have our responsibilities demarcated. So before this particular workshop, yesterday we had to sit and discuss how are you going to reorganize our timings, how are you going to reorganize our menu so that I can be free every day from 10:30 to 12:30 and again free from 2:30 to 5:30. So this kind of factoring in is something that becomes important in order to be able to manage our time to carry out a lot of our academic pursuit. And I know it's particularly very difficult for many women because women are also expected to do a lot of care work. And several women, young faculty, young scholars, probably who have small children and babies, a lot of the care workers are not coming, their domestic helps are not coming, childcare facilities are shut down, etc. Then for them to be able to also care for their home, care for their children, and also do academic work is quite challenging. There's international publications, or let's say international information that's being put out that during the COVID times, there are more men who are publishing and the women's publication rate has come down. So there are editors who are saying that we are getting lesser papers from women to be processed for publication. And that really tells something about the kind of pressure that women have to go through. And especially in countries abroad where jobs are never permanent. They have to work towards getting a tenure track position, and therefore they have to publish every year several papers, right? And that they have to do along with several of their domestic responsibilities and also their commitments. So academic writing, therefore, is not a task that happens in isolation. For many of us, it has to happen along with our responsibilities for guiding our PhD students, our responsibilities for writing new research proposals, and also responsibilities for administrative work. So it's multiple tasks, and within which writing and publishing is one big task that we have to do regularly, right? So it's in this context again, we have to be thinking about what does it mean to do academic writing. The other very big thing I think for most young people is a huge self-doubt about what is it that I can write, when there is so much that's already written, what else can I write, And also, I also sometimes go through this interesting experience where when I read an article, I'll say, oh, wow, I wanted to write this kind of article on the same topic, and this person has already written and published. Now, what do I write? So it's like uh, practically everybody is writing at the same point of time. So till you publish your paper, you're very anxious. What if a similar paper comes out? Actually, that kind of anxiety is much higher within sciences compared to social sciences. Okay. However, there is definitely a lot of self-doubt about, am I good enough? Have I figured really out what I want to write? Do I know how to express myself well? Will my paper be accepted at all? What if it gets rejected? Does it mean a rejection of me? All these kind of worries that preoccupy young researchers. And very often it's like, where do I start? They often talk about the writer's block. They say, I sit in front of my laptop, but I'm not able to write anything. So they talk about a writer's block. So as part of these 3.5-day session, I will definitely take on what do we mean when we say writer's block, and is there anything like a writer's block, and how do we deal with that so that we can really get writing well and also flowing well. Okay, coming to this question on the significance of academic writing. Okay, what is the significance of academic writing? As I said, beyond your career or beyond your PhD. Actually, academic writing signifies that there has been a change in our paradigm. Okay, there's been a change in the way we understand as to what is work. So when physical work is what has been a priority during the period of industrialization and what we refer to as the industrial era, currently we are in a knowledge era or a knowledge economy where we are paid for our thinking, we are paid for ideas, we are paid for communication. So writing becomes such an important thing. Thinking, writing, communicating through writing becomes a very important way in which we actually carry on our economies and also earn our bread and butter, or dal and chawal, or roti and dal, whatever, So therefore, when you've chosen to be in academics or you've chosen to do PhD, it means you basically have subscribed to be part of a knowledge economy. So being part of a knowledge economy, you cannot escape from writing, right? And when you write, it has to be written well, and it has to be communicating what you really have in mind. And also it should be convincing and help the other person change their understanding about something. Okay. So academic writing therefore becomes an important aspect of PhD research, of getting jobs in academic institutions, for achieving visibility, recognition, and also upward mobility. So individuals who join as assistant professors and do not have new positions opening up, but as per the University Grants Commission rules, they can apply for career advancement. But for the eligibility of career advancement, you should have research publications or 3 or 5 research publications. And sometimes the specifications also will say that these research publications have to be over and above your PhD related work, right? So it means you cannot say once I get a job, I'm done, Gone are those days when people would say, I got a permanent job and I'm settled and I'm going to be teaching 4 hours or 6 hours in a week, and rest of the time I can be home. I know, I studied in a university where that was the way it was. We had to wait for our teachers to come into the class, and our teachers used to come and teach for some time, something that they thought was important. and they went home. And they had these massive bungalows adjacent to the institute on the campus. So most of them had beautiful kitchen gardens and had very leisurely life as faculty. You know, they joined as lecturers, then became readers, and then became professors purely on the basis of their teaching and maybe some research that they did. But those days are gone. So you get into a job doesn't mean you're done. You have to be working, and I think it's a good thing that we keep working and contributing towards the knowledge rather than stay put with what we know when we have done our PhD and keep teaching our students from some archaic textbook. So what is it that we are doing now as academics, which is different from what I said about my own teachers? So let me just add one more line to what I told you about my teachers. So I went through my master's degree and I always felt quite, what do you say, disappointed. And I always felt that probably my teachers didn't work hard enough to teach us. In the sense, when you have very challenging students and teachers don't work very hard, you will get disappointed. Students get disappointed with their teachers. So I somehow vowed that if I ever become a faculty, you know, if I get into academics and become a faculty, I'm going to work every single day for my students and make them feel that every class that they sit through, they really have got something from me and they enjoyed the class. So as much as I enjoy teaching, I want my students also to enjoy my classes, right? So which means having gone through bad teachers taught me a lesson that I have to be a good teacher, and I learned how not to be a teacher. Okay, what kind of teacher I don't want to be and what kind of teacher I want to be. Similarly, my research experience has been fabulous, but I also did many things that took much longer time than I should. So by learning what I have done wrong, I have learned how things to be done right. And I tend to now teach my research scholars how to do things right so that they don't lose a lot of time. Okay. So if they lose a lot of time, it is their choice. But from my side, I always make sure that they don't lose time. Okay. So what is the relationship then between all the tasks that we do as academics? So academic writing sits in the center of all that, right? So we carry out research for which we have to write research proposals. And only when you write good research proposals, you get good research grants to carry out research. And when you carry out a lot of research, that enables you to publish, okay? You publish in reputed journals and you are respected for the work that you do. You also build a lot of visibility. You also get invitations to be part of conferences. You can meet with people from your background, meet your peers. They will consider you as a person to be with them on panels, so on and so forth. And given the knowledge that you gain through research, you can actually contribute towards public policy. You can do a lot of advocacy for strengthening public policy. You can also work with civil society groups and non-governmental organizations to learn from them and also be able to share your own expertise, etc. Now, a lot of what we learn through our research, publishing, and public advocacy directly contributes towards our teaching, right? Which means these are not independent of each other. They're all interdependent. So through our learning, what we have read, what we've understood, what we have grappled with, we develop our research protocols, research proposals, and carry out research. And the research that we do in turn contributes towards our teaching. So in all the teaching that we do, if we were to give examples from our own research projects, then that actually enhances what you're teaching in the classroom. Because you're not teaching purely on the basis of some published book or few published articles, but your own publications are also part of your classroom readings for your students. So the authenticity that each of us has as a teacher enormously and gets enhanced when we actually have our hands soiled in doing research and in doing good research. So all these are extremely important interdependent aspects within academia. And as I would like to say again, that academic writing sits in the center of all these major activities that we do as faculty. And for research scholars, very often academic writing itself is central because their research and their dissertation is centrally within these. And based on this expertise and their publication that they get, the publications that they carry out, that gives them the opportunity to come into the academic environment, be teaching assistants, also join in as faculty, and then grow their careers in the faculty, in the academia. So this is how academic writing becomes central to all of us. Shall I go ahead, or are there any questions at this point?
There is a question. Can I take it up, and can I
Yes.
do that?
Yes.
There is a question from Veronica. She is asking that is post-positivism same as construction, or is constructivism a thread of post-positivism?
Everything that is beyond positivism, that also questions positivism, people use the word post-positivism, but all other paradigms that exist, constructivism, critical theory, all these are not residual categories, because when you use a word like post-positivism, it tends to look like everything that's not positivism is clubbed as post-positivism. So it tends to give it a kind of a residual label, whereas each of the other types that are there, the pragmatism, then mixed methods, etc., also have their own clarity about how do they build knowledge, what kind of epistemologies that they subscribe to, what kind of methodologies they subscribe to, so on and so forth.
Thank you, ma'am. There's only one question till now.
Yeah.
So I'll get back to you later on.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead. Some of the questions that often come up when we talk about academic writing is something that I've taken up here. And what we are talking about is in the academic realm, people often will ask this, or let's say whether it's academic or otherwise, there could be a question where we say, does thinking come first or writing come first? Okay, and if we were to say that writing comes first, and it's the written text that we read, and then we start forming our opinion about many aspects, then there's always a question about whoever has written first, did they write it without any thought? Okay, so, and there are also several communities that don't really have any written cultures, but have huge knowledge base. Okay, they have a lot of traditional knowledge, which is not necessarily in a written form, and doesn't mean things that are not written doesn't mean those communities and those cultures don't have thoughts, don't have ideas, and don't have bodies of knowledge. They do have. So within the academic realm, that's the reason why we are posing this question within the academic realm. Does thinking come first or writing come first? It's still a tricky question for us. It's almost like within academia, a chicken and egg. However, when you're doing a PhD, when you're enrolling for PhD and want to do PhD, you will often be asked by your research supervisor or the panel that's interviewing you, what is it that you want to research on? Okay, very often, of course, nowadays, students are not enrolled into PhD without having worked on a draft research proposal. Okay, when I joined my PhD, it was enough to just have a one-page concept note on what I want to do, right? But nowadays, the expectation is much more. So it means you need to do a lot of prior thinking about what you want to do for your PhD, which again means that if you have an interesting idea and say, oh, has anybody done research on this idea? Then with that idea, you go about looking for literature, looking for writings, looking for publications, etc., or looking for books, etc. That is how you guide yourself towards an area of interest. Okay. So the area of interest still comes from a thought that you have. Okay. So, for example, when I wanted to do PhD and then I got enrolled in IIT Bombay, my guide asked me, of course, as part of my interview, application interview, I said, I want to look at appropriate technologies, role of women in appropriate technologies and in rural development. It was a very generic topic, and the panel was nice. They had long discussions with me, conversations with me, etc. But when you actually have to begin doing a PhD, you have to become more specific. So then my guide kept asking me, Lakshmi, what is it you want to do? You have to come back. We should not be losing time. Okay. Then it so happened that I opened a interesting magazine, and then there was a article written by a very famous environmentalist by name Anil Agarwal. He was the founder, director of Center for Science and Environment, which is in Delhi, CSE. So he wrote a piece which was titled "Try Asking a Woman First." Okay, and I read that article, and there he actually had spoken that every single technology that's introduced in rural areas, it's true for all aspects of our life, but that paper had to do with rural areas. So he said, for every aspect of life, nobody really consults women. Okay, so whether it's the kind of stove that she uses, the kind of sickle that she holds in her hand, every different technology that women use, nobody really asks them for getting inputs on what kind of design will work for them. Okay, so the sensitivity that your users should give their inputs on what they think they want was not there at all. So he was talking about how rural women do enormous work, but they're not recognized as individuals. They're not recognized as individuals having rights. They're not seen as citizens, and not seen as, clients, customers, and individuals who can contribute towards planning and policy making. So when I read that article, it really struck my thought process, and I really said, this is quite fascinating. So I went to my guide and sat with her, and I said, this piece I have read, and it really had struck a chord in me. And I'm very interested in thinking about rural women's role in agriculture, and how does rural development look at women, so on and so forth. So it means um, there is a thought that I had read, and then that started off my own process in a direction where I'm looking at what else now I can take this. How do I take this forward? Okay. So does thinking come first or writing come first is a very tricky question, because we don't really have a blank slate at this point of time. There's so much that's being written, so much that's still to be written, and we are basically intervening within those spaces. However, I would like to also say that writing itself is a process of thinking, in the sense it's not like you finish your thinking first and then you sit and write, because writing itself is a process of thinking. Every sentence that you write, you often wonder, are you making a generalization? Are you making an accusation? Are you trivializing something? Are you simplifying something, or are you making something simplistic? In the sense, you are continuously using several parameters to assess what you're writing. So there is a lot of thinking that goes into what you're writing and how you're assessing what you're writing. People often also ask this question, is academic writing an art or is it a craft? Okay. So while a lot of creative writing could be considered as an art, academic writing definitely is a craft. Okay, we call it a craft because there are several set standards that are there. The standards are there to enable us to follow certain rules of how to do academic writing, but these standards are not about standardization, because if all academic writing is highly standardized, you would really find it more boring than academic writing itself, right? So there are rules and there are broad guidelines, there are suggestions, there are structures, but the structure cannot be constraining the content. So the form and the content both are important, and craft basically tells you how to go about it and what is the structure that you need to follow. So academic writing basically is a craft. Do we write to convince our readers about our view, or do we write to change their perspective? Okay. Again, this is not again an either or question. Very often these go together. First of all, you need to convince your reader so that they can change their perspective. But basically what you write is not about what you're writing, which is your preoccupation and your view and your perspective, but it's about something that is important to the other person who is reading it. If for the other person that's of no relevance, no matter how convincingly you write, that won't make any difference to them, right? So whatever aspect you're writing, definitely there is a need to have a clarity about who is your audience and who are your readers, for whom are you writing, and who is your community of people to whom you would like to, to whom you would like to put this out and be part of those conversations. Again, tomorrow when I talk to you about literature review, I'll take you into more detail about what do I mean by a community, and what do we mean when we say when you write, you are contributing to a community, right? So that's something I will unravel some more tomorrow. But basically, writing is about not just proving a point for yourself, but it's about convincing the readers, the person who's reading, about what's your argument, what is the logic of your argument, what are the assumptions and presumptions of your argument, and whether your argument stands well at the end of the paper that you have written. And given that, then the person who's reading it might find it quite interesting and find it quite convincing. Very often they're not convinced, and that provokes them. Maybe they take that forward and argue it out, or maybe write another paper that counters what you have written. Therefore, academic endeavors are about contestations, are about countering each other, are about being able to argue out, so that we come to some broad consensus about many aspects of our social lives and social realities. So writing therefore has multiple registers that it attempts to address at any point of time. So while you write and publish to get a degree, what you write and publish is actually getting recorded and recognized for other purposes. Okay, as a body, as part of a body of knowledge, which is being contributed to acknowledge a particular set of observations. Okay, so the other interesting question that scholars often ask is, can we create new knowledge? Okay, because all scholars are told that you have to assess whether your research is original. Okay, and you have to assess whether you're contributing something new. What is the new that you're contributing? So again, this becomes quite a big question, and scholars do get quite anxious about this, whether what they're doing is really going to be producing new knowledge, whether something is really very important for them, or they are doing something very routine. Okay, now this is again very important, and your PhD supervisor should be helping you out. Sometimes you might not be producing a whole lot of new knowledge, but definitely probably you're asking some questions which are different, right? So you're asking different questions that will enable the unfolding of new knowledge that tries to help us explain a particular aspect better than what we were able to explain before. Okay, so totally new knowledge, it's not possible in social sciences that we'll say that there is one Einstein or there's one uh, scientist, but several people contribute, and over a period of time, new knowledge gets built based on those kind of perspectives that get built. So the challenges that scientists have in producing new knowledge is much more than what scientists can do. Yeah, so I'll move on, but are there any questions at this point?
That while writing the problem statement and importance of doing that particular study, to what extent we can put our subjective experience in the general paper writing?
See, a lot depends on what is the paradigm of research that you're subscribing to. Okay, so if you are basically doing qualitative research and you subscribe to phenomenology, you're subscribing to standpoint theory, etc., then clearly your experience becomes important. Okay, your subjective experience is important because you often hear people also saying, from where I am coming. Okay, when they are saying something, they have an argument, and then they'll also say, from where I'm coming. So when they say, from where I'm coming, it doesn't mean whether they're coming from Chennai or they're coming from Delhi. It basically means how is their social position informing their worldview. Okay, and you know very well that when we talk about social position, there are multiple subjective positions that are there. So you have a position as a woman, you can have a position as a Dalit woman, you can have a position as a Muslim woman. So if you're using the phenomenological paradigm, you're using constructivism, you're using standpoint theory, then clearly your experience, your perspective becomes important. But if you have a completely positivist kind of paradigm that you subscribe to, you have a quantitative research, you have a sampling methodology, and you have numbers, etc., then you cannot be bringing yourself into that proposal or into that paper. Yeah, is that clear?
Thank you, ma'am. Can we take the next question?
Yes.
Yeah. How to overcome language barrier while writing research paper?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes, I understand. All of us are known as non-native English speakers, okay, which means English is not our native language. We all have our own mother tongues, regional languages, accents, etc. So we have learned English and we use English for many aspects of our life, and research publications in English journals require you to write in English. However, now there are several services that most journals have come up with where you can seek support for language editing. Okay. There are also online sites where you can put your document and get your language edited. Okay. So language still would be, while language is important, that's not necessarily the reason why our papers don't get accepted. Okay, so having a very sound research paper that has sound logical way in which it's organized and also it's argued out becomes very important more than language, in the sense singular, plural, verbs being changed, sentence constructions being a little clumsy, etc., can still be handled if your overall understanding and idea and perspective is good. Okay, so one cannot say that I'm not able to publish because my language is not very good. Okay, though I know that when you have a much better free-flowing expression, you don't stumble and don't face the kind of mental barriers that you would have if English itself is a barrier. Therefore, actually, reading a lot is important. Reading a lot of material, writing what you read, making notes of what you write, speaking in this language, all these become very important to enhance your ability of expression. So if your ability to express yourself gets enhanced, then slowly over a period of time, this can be circumvented. There's another interesting question that also comes up is what is knowledge, and is knowledge additive or is it iterative? Okay, additive in the sense it's like the first in the picture visual that you have here. You see them actually one after the other building up like a building block. So something gets done and then somebody adds to that, and then there's another research paper that adds to that. So you think of it like a building block, adding up one after the other. So knowledge as additive, as opposed to knowledge being iterative. And I actually used the image of a rangoli where you actually see there is a center that's a core, and it spins off into multiple very, very different ways of engaging with the idea, and sometimes they all come together. So a lot depends on how you look at them. Do you look at one idea spinning off many more ideas, and each idea again has its own cluster of literature that comes up, and very often they reinforce each other. Okay, so when you take the perspective that knowledge is additive, what you basically have visually in your mind is that there are a bunch of facts out there for us to research, and each time we are researching one after the other, we add up this knowledge. Okay, as opposed to that, when you look at knowledge as iterative, it means people will carry out research, or researchers carry out research and put out a bunch of interesting observations, and then you'll have another researcher carrying out a related research, but countering the position that is there in the earlier group. And that in turn again spins off a new idea. For example, I'll tell you. Earlier, the thinking was that, all work that is done, wage work, all wage work or income earning work that's going to be done in the world is all going to be part of the organized sector. Okay, that is how societies were being visualized, because prior to the period of industrialization in Europe, basically their economies were also very agriculture in nature, and then came a very small level of small industries, or let's say individual owned workshops and small guilds that were there in the rural areas, etc. And much later came in the big shift towards having a single place like a factory, and individuals going into a factory to work and emerging out of the factory, and the distinction that is made between a public place and a private place, a workplace and a home. Okay, even now when you look at handloom weavers, you look at artisans, etc., very often the demarcation line between what is work and what is home is very difficult, because both happen in the same location. Okay, and if you see a woman in a weaving household, she will be taking care of her child, she'll be cooking food, and she'll also be spinning a yarn for the weaving to take place. Okay, a potter's wife will crush the mud and keep the mud ready for the potter to start spinning the wheel, while she is also using, watering the plants and cooking food. So the demarcation between wage work and unpaid homework did not exist, right? So when you had things that are not so well demarcated, and later they got demarcated, the thinking was all parts of the world is going to have an industrial process where all work will happen in an industrial setup or in a workplace, and everything else that happens at home is not work, and those are all private lives of people. However, in many countries like India, there's a lot of work that happens that is not necessarily within a factory setting, and a lot of that is considered to be what we refer to as unorganized sector work or informal sector work, right? So when you had millions of people during the COVID-19 lockdown walking, they're all part of the informal sector work, okay? Unorganized sector work, informal sector work. So the theory that no work will exist outside a factory kind of understanding got completely, turned upside down when researchers, economists worked on African countries and Asian countries and actually said that the formal sector and informal sector are not two separate entities, but they are actually interdependent and they're interlocked. And the formal sector actually exists for a lot of work that happens in the informal sector, right? So the conceptualization of informal sector then became a new way of rethinking about the informal sector and who occupies the informal sector. So it means you have ways of thinking about reality in one particular way, and then you will find that additional research, new research, when it questions these hitherto accepted and hard concepts and theories, those concepts and theories go through change. Therefore, knowledge is additive, but it's also highly iterative. Because it's iterative, it grows. Okay, if we purely look at it as additive, then it means none of these bars that we have in this graph can be removed. Everything will be there and they will grow in the same direction, and all of it will be considered knowledge. Okay, whereas in an iterative process there is a possibility that something could be removed, something else could flourish independent of one knowledge base and build a new knowledge base. So I would basically say it's linked to the ontology that you rely on. What's your ontology? And somebody might say again, what is ontology? So ontology again refers to what is your philosophy of the world. What is your philosophy of how reality exists? Okay, if you think that reality exists with an understanding that there are facts out there and research have to discover those facts and put them on the table, and everybody discovering different facts put together will give us our understanding of knowledge. This is one way of looking at how knowledge building happens. If you look at it as an iterative process, you basically are saying that there are different kinds of facts, there are different ways in which facts can be constructed, and certain facts actually counter certain other facts, and therefore there cannot be one truth, there cannot be one fact, there cannot be one kind of knowledge building, and therefore there's a multiple ways we have to look at every aspect from multiple directions, right? So there are lots of scope for triangulation, lots of scope for looking at things from multiple lenses, multiple possibilities. Knowledge gives you this possibility of an additive and iterative. However, additive tends to be very deterministic. Iterative provides possibilities for a lot of flourishing of ideas and growth of ideas with flexibility to keep growing and learning. Okay, so now we'll go and look at this question. What is the relationship between reading and writing? Okay, and if we were to unpack what is reading and what is writing, reading is about decoding, in the sense when we start learning to read as children, even before we start reading, actually, if we are introduced to books, we are introduced to a lot of visual objects to play with. So when a child is given a ball, then the child is told that it's a ball, right? Then it's given a small boy and they say this is a girl. Then they say this is a dog. And very often little children are then introduced to lots of shapes. And then the shapes are understood in terms of spherical objects, like a round thing is a ball and the square thing is a box, etc. And then you move on to actually showing them in the house the plug points and then the switchboards and then various objects in the house, and get the child to detect the shapes, etc. Which means by looking at objects, you are associating certain kinds of sounds with those objects. So something that's like this then is called circular, it is round, etc. And it can be a ball, it can be a globe. So you are continuously reading. You're reading into things and you're learning. Similarly, when you're given a book with pictures, even before you're made to write, you're told about various objects. And then you're also told that these are alphabets, and alphabets put together make words, and many words put together make a sentence, so on and so forth. So which means through reading, we basically learn to decode alphabets, words, numbers, graphs, statistics, analysis, interpretation, concept formation, theories, and so on. So when you are reading a research paper, you're just not reading a paper published in English. You are reading through that paper, which takes you into the broader configuration of a particular discipline, the contours of a particular discipline and its ideas, its concepts, its theories. Then the researcher is talking about a particular methodological tool that's used for carrying out the study. Then there's a description about the context where the study was done. There's a description about a sample. Then there's data that's put out. If it's a quantitative paper, there's data that's put out in tables. There are graphs, and there are also more complex statistics that are there. Then you also would have several researchers like economists, econometricians, etc., would also have formula, and then they'll have derive some kind of observations and strengths of association of variables and indicators. And then they come into their discussion, they come into their conclusions. So it means when you're reading, you've already been inducted into decoding all that you're reading in that paper through your prior training in your master's degree of understanding a lot of that kind of literature. Further, as a researcher, you're also trained more in statistics in terms of understanding analysis, interpretation, etc. So it means reading is not a very placid, passive activity, but it's a very active engagement to decode what you're reading. Okay, so if reading is decoding, then writing is encoding. Means you use the same set of abilities and capabilities that you have gained back now into a paper, which you are writing using your observations, your data set, your analysis, your interpretations, your discussion, your conclusions. So it follows the same rules that are followed by other papers, but you have a bunch of new connections that you're making in your paper. So writing is encoding. So if reading is decoding, writing is encoding. So it's about writing back to the community. And as I said, when we do the literature review session, I'll talk to you much more about this. But basically, when we say literature review for your research paper or for your research proposal or for your dissertation topic, you are looking at what is the existing body of knowledge that exists in that subject matter. So you review what is there, and then when your researcher guide says that you have to identify gaps in literature, it means you are looking through all that literature and identifying what seems to be known and what still seems to be not adequately explored. And you use that as your space where you do your research. So when you complete that research, or when you're in that process of doing that research, you are in a position where you can go back to tell that community, hello friends, you know what, I read all your literature. Now I would like to tell you what I have observed, right? It means you talk back to your community of researchers. So doing literature review, doing research and writing research paper to go back and publish is like going back to that community to tell them what is it that you are contributing now to them so that they can understand and they can accept this and build it into their existing knowledge. So it contributes towards that additive knowledge. It also contributes towards this iterative knowledge. Okay, so when students say that, you know, I've done my research, I want to submit, I want to get my degree, I don't want to really publish, that really doesn't happen, because it means you are not ready to stand the test of accountability. Okay, if you are reading somebody else's work, you have shaped your work, you have a research supervisor who's given a lot of time, an institution that has given scholarship, it means there is an ethical responsibility that you have for the research participants from whom you've collected the data, and to the community of researchers from whom you have drawn your understanding, and now you put back your findings there in the form of a paper. So this is also a kind of validation of your work, and also a way of finding your seat now in that community. Okay, so you find a place for yourself in that community. So academic writing and publishing basically enables you to do this kind of getting into a community of researchers. So it's about using the concepts, theories, building into that knowledge community your understanding, observations, interpretations, arguments, debate, whether you agree, disagree, etc. So there is a link to evidences and building on them. Okay, it means you have your evidences, you have prior evidences that you got through literature review, and now you're linking your evidences and interpretations to that. So you encode back through your writing. Okay, so as I said, reading and writing are not placid, passive activities. They're very active activities. And this happens often, in the sense, even if you were to read a newspaper article, it's not like you just read and try to understand what is being written there. While you're reading there, you're continuously reflecting on, but why do these people do this? Why is this being said like this? You know, why is this being understood like this? So there is already a lot of red flags that keep coming up in your head. By the time you finish reading that piece, you already have 4 different things that you want to say about that. So reading does not happen in isolation of thinking. These go simultaneously, thinking, reflection, and making connections to what you already know. Okay, so that's also how your own mind works. It's continuously, whatever you read keeps getting built into all the multiple files that are there in your head, into various domains of knowledge that you already have, right? So when you read something, probably you take a personal, you draw something personally from there. When you read something academic, you draw something that's going to be academically valuable for you. Okay, for example, if you read something about a cyber crime, right? So when you're reading it very carefully, you're looking at, oh God, this is how it happens. So I need to be careful. Okay, next time when I carry an ATM card, when I carry a credit card or debit card, I must not give it away to somebody. You know, you make a decision that because you read in that piece that debit cards or credit cards given away at restaurants to the waiters for swiping often can mean in many countries that it got duplicated. Okay, and it gets used for online shopping. So when you read that, it gives you a hint that you have to be very careful with your card. It means you're drawing some kind of quick lesson to yourself. But when you read academic papers, you draw some observations which are going to be useful for your research, right? So I'll talk about that a little later. But essentially, reading is for academic reading in academic context is critical reading. Means you're reading it, keeping other material that you have read ahead or earlier in perspective. And therefore, when you write also, you have to write effectively, and effective writing about good language, but it's also about the clarity with which you write and the connections that you are making. Okay, that goes together. So reading and writing are two sides of the same coin, right? You cannot do one very well and not do the other. Okay, you have to do both. And as researchers at whatever level, these are almost like something that you have to take for granted and say you have to be doing this well. Yeah, we're going ahead, Shramishta ji. So now I'll take you through looking at what are the key elements of reading and what are the key elements of writing. Definitely each of you make your notes, and if you have your queries, please also write down your queries. We can take them one after the other. And I would also like to tell you that this PPT will also be available. Okay, so you don't have to take pictures of each screen. Okay. What are all the key elements of reading? Okay. One of the most important aspects of reading, which looks like an old school of thought, is notes taking. Okay. You write notes after reading what you're reading, or while you're reading, you please do make notes. Now, notes taking has somehow become so old fashioned. I do see that very often over the years. I think not only me, many other teachers also observe that students actually don't take any notes. They just sit, listen. Okay. What they miss basically is they miss out on capturing several things that the teacher is saying as part of the lesson and also tangentially, and also the ability to be able to capture what you're listening to and what you're processing and how you're making sense of it. You miss out on those skills if you don't write. So you'd often find that in a class, while there's a nice PPT that you put up, students will, raise their phone and then take a picture and then they put the phone down. After some time, they're quiet. Again, so for every slide, they keep putting their phone up and clicking pictures. And that's seen as notes taking. Okay. Or we also have students who will keep saying, when are you going to upload the PPT? Okay. So there is a complete shortchanging of not writing notes, not reading published research papers, not going to the library to issue books and read them. So there is an emphasis on reading through a PowerPoint presentation and then just writing bullets in the question paper, answer paper. Okay. So while probably students who want to complete a master's degree and take on some desk job, probably it's okay with them. But if you are keen on doing an MPhil, keen on doing PhD, definitely not having characteristics of scholars, of reading, writing, reflecting, making notes, etc. If you're not displaying those, not entertaining those, or not nurturing those kind of abilities, then will actually place you in a very difficult circumstance, because you just feel there's nothing that you can write. There's nothing for you to really express yourself. So that's a difficult space to be in, especially if you are in academics. So notes taking, basically what it does, it captures and embodies what you experience, the ideas that you're reading. When you are reading, what is it that it's doing to you? In what ways is it talking to you? In what ways is it giving you interesting new ways of thinking about something? So when you read something, please make sure that you're also doing notes taking. Okay. People also, when they are reading articles, for example, if they photocopy an article, print and photocopy an article, then they take a highlighter and or they use a pencil or use a pen and then highlight important points. They draw lines under, or they use a highlighter marker and then keep drawing. But sometimes you will see a paper full of only all those lines and all highlights. Then how do you know what is more important than the other? Or whatever you highlighted, what is your objective of highlighting that? You know, there are people who do color coding. So if you have a color coding, that makes sense, because you probably are saying in any article that I see, there are insights on methodology. I'm going to use a pink highlighter. In a paper where there is interesting discussion on issues to do with inclusion and exclusion, I want to use a highlighter. So for example, if you have come up with color coding as to how you're going to highlight a paper, that's useful for you. So when you pick that paper again, you know, you're only looking at methodological questions. You can see how many places there are yellow highlights and just go and read that paragraph. But the problem there is, to write something, you may have to go back 15 or 20 papers that you have read. So how are you going to remember what is there in which paper, you know? So highlighting is useful at that point, but it's not useful in terms of memory recall when you have to sit and write. Okay, if you pick that paper, maybe you know what you have highlighted. There are also people who write lots of things on the margins. You know, inside a printed paper, they write lots of things on the margins. They also do that with library books. They bring library books and scribble extensively on those library books. And these are definitely not anybody should do, but lots of people do that. Yeah. So highlighting is also seen as something that's very much part of an engaged reading. The other aspect of reading also is annotating. And I had asked all of you to do one assignment where you have to read an article and do an annotation. And most of you have done your annotations and sent to me, so I will be reading them. So annotating is a way of framing each reading and building your reflection into it. Means you're reading that article and then you're writing down what you think are the most salient points of that research article and what do you think about that. Okay, so that's an annotating of the article. When you have read a lot of papers and you made all your notes, and then you also have annotations. So you have notes and you have annotations. Okay, annotations are author specific and notes are theme specific, in the sense from a particular article you might draw some notes, but you can also have notes which are running on one particular theme. Okay, so up to you how you'd like to organize it. And if you want to discuss that more, we can, and I have another slide which gives more details. But notes taking in classes, notes taking in seminars, notes taking in lectures, notes taking in webinars, in Zoom, all these are important, where you put down the date and write down what are all the key points that are being made, what are the most interesting ideas that you got while you were hearing that, etc. Annotating is very specific to every paper that you read. When you do all this, at a point, you can create actually a chronology of all that you have read. Okay, papers published in 2012, published in 2014, 16, 18, you'll start seeing a very interesting pattern that's emerging from all those papers based on your annotations and based on your notes. Okay, so in a way, making notes and capturing all of that through your annotations, etc., will help you build your filing system. Okay, now filing system is one where probably you have in your laptop created folders for each of the themes that you're reading. Okay, so your broader theme could be children, or it could be on youth, it could be on women, it could be disability rights, it could be on minority communities, etc. That's a broad theme. Within that, probably you have very different research papers that you're reading on aspirations, about employability, about self-awareness, about public policy, etc. So create different folders and start saving all the PDFs that you're able to download into those folders. And then parallelly to those folders, you also create notes. Okay, So in every folder, you can have a notes-taking file where you start writing your notes when you're reading the paper and file them, right? So you can always take all those notes together, put them into a Word document, and then from there you can also create an Excel, but you can do a word search. Okay, you can do saying that, how many papers I can see aspirations and employability going together. Like that, you can do search within your documents and then start developing themes to be able to write your own research paper or do your own literature review. Yeah. So notes taking becomes important. Whether otherwise, what would happen is every other day you're reading a paper, you're highlighting and you're putting it aside, taking another paper, reading it, highlighting, putting it aside. Where do you have any comprehensive documentation of what you have read, what you have understood, what are the reflection points that you have? And using this body of knowledge that you're reading, how are you arching? Arching is like you imagine yourself like a springboard. When you're in a swimming pool, you have a springboard. You just jump on that springboard and you go off, right? You fly high and then you go into the water, deep into the water, and then come out to swim. So other people's research is your springboard. And for you to springboard, you need to create that, right? You need to create that entire body of work into your own document where you've written it up. And that is talking to you. So you go beyond published work to your notes that you have prepared of all that you have read, right? So you create your own filing system of research papers that you have, and also make your notes and use that for writing your own paper. And also when you read papers, you would also look at their bibliography, okay? So every time you're reading, you see within brackets, parenthesis. For example, it says Lingam 2018, and there's an interesting statement to which that particular citation is attributed. You would like to see what reference is that, right? And if you're doing it online, actually in a lot of journal articles, they already come hyperlinked. They are blue in color and they are hyperlinked. So if you click and say open it in a separate tab, that paper actually opens into another tab. Okay, so it means at a point of time when you're reading a paper, all relevant papers that are cited by that author, you already can gain access to them. Okay, so it's important for you to see what kind of references has this author given, and you make note of those references, because it means when you read one paper, you now have got 5 other papers which are important for you to read, and that's your cross reference, right? So you capture those 5 papers and then look at what else is there. So in literature review, this is one of the ways in which literature review is done, right? While tomorrow I will tell you about more systematically than taking one paper and doing it like a snowballing. You know how in research methodology you have a snowballing technique. That is, if you don't know your universe from where you're going to get your sample, you will identify one sample and then you speak to that person and then you ask that person, can you refer me to somebody else who is like you, who does things like you? Okay, and that person knows somebody else, or if that person is part of an association or a community, then that person can connect you to that group. So you get one more person, then you get one more person. So that's called in social sciences snowballing method. So you can use a snowballing method in literature review, but very often if you want to write a review article or based on literature review, that kind of methodology of doing snowballing is not acceptable. Okay? Because you have to give what was your methodology for doing review of literature. And you can't say I've used a snowballing technique. That won't work. You have to use a proper search strategy and arrive at your searches and then do your review of literature. And I'll talk to you about that tomorrow. So any paper that you read opens up another world for you. Okay, it opens up more research papers, and they in turn will open more research papers. Therefore, reading an article right from the title and I would like to talk to many of you about titles. Okay, what is the significance of a title for a research paper, right? And how do you actually look at the title itself as something that's so catchy, that's getting people to want to read your paper? Yeah, and I will definitely comment on many of you, the titles that you have given for this short concept note that you have given me, to help you reflect on what kind of title would be useful, and also why do we have titles the way we have. Okay, do they tell that there is something lacking, therefore we have titles like that? So there's much to learn when you pick a paper, right from its title to the references. Okay, so that's the level of engagement that you must have when you read something. So here are some tips as to how to do notes taking. Okay, so it looks like it's important to also share how to do notes taking, because much of what I'm actually talking to you and saying is not part of any academic program. It's not part of any research training. However, these become really important, because if you build in a sense of discipline as to how you do your research right from the beginning, in fact, that stays with you all your life. And that's what is going to enable you to manage your time well, manage your resources very well, and be able to write and publish. I would often find young colleagues who do very good research projects and then not really publish anything. And sometimes I talk to them and I ask them, have you managed to publish any papers? Then they actually say, no, but I didn't get any time. I got so busy, Then I moved on to another research project. So sometimes I really wonder, is it because of lack of time that we don't write papers and publish? Or is it because we have not given thought to what can be published from that research fairly early in the research? Okay, so most of you as researchers, whether you're faculty or you are research scholars, it's very important for you to plan what kind of research papers you want to publish based on your work. So a research plan and having a publication plan simultaneously would be very useful, because you, for example, if you're having scholarship for 3 years or 4 years and you want to publish in the last 6 months, it won't really work. Okay, you have to have right from year one your publication plan. So not having publication plan is therefore also linked to not having the right discipline at various points of time right from the beginning of research. Okay, so while this looks like a very pedantic, ordinary, everyday, boring, monotonous kind of thing, why does Professor Lingam spend time tips to note taking? Is it so important? I would like to tell you it's very important. Okay, I do lots of notes. Tomorrow maybe I'll pick up some and start showing like this. I do notes taking. I type things into my laptop. I have an entire notebook to prepare PPTs for all of you guys. I did a lot of reading. I've read lots of blogs, and I went back to my earlier PPTs. So I have a notebook too. I use laptop extensively, but I also have a notebook. So every meeting that I sit, I listen, I hear, even Zoom meetings that I hear, all that I sit in, I keep writing notes. Okay. So if I have to go back next year and look at, what it is like, you can see I have a very bad handwriting because my handwriting got quite damaged with continuously using the keyboard. So I call it keyboard challenge handwriting. Yes, I keep doing lots of notes taking. It's important part of your discipline to be able to do notes taking. So the first point here, the first tip is, don't confuse highlighting photocopied papers as notes taking. Okay, this inhibits you to arcing into your own thinking on the papers that you read. So if you highlight, that's a nice easy shortcut way of doing something, but it's still a very lazy job. You have not written anything anywhere. You just highlighted something there. Now, if you were to read soft copies of articles like PDFs, there is a possibility of putting post-its into the PDF. There is a possibility, in the sense, some versions of PDF will allow you to do a lot of ongoing editing work. Okay, you can put post-its, you can put bubbles, and you can write notes. So it's useful to do those, but you still have to write somewhere else a piece on what you have read. Okay, so it's like once you read, just sit quiet, take a deep breath, and then write what is it that you have gathered from that paper. In what ways did it talk to you? What did you find very interesting? Sometimes you find the methodology is very interesting. Sometimes you find that they are making references to some tool that they've used and validated it. So you say, okay, I want to know what tool that is. Sometimes they refer to a report that they are talking about, a report, and you'll say, okay, where is that report? I want to see what is there in that report. They're talking about some data. So you are looking at all their resources and wanting to know how to get those resources, read those resources, etc. Okay, so don't confuse notes taking to highlighting. Then separate your notes taking from the platform that you're engaged in. So that's the point. Whether it's your printed paper, photocopied paper, or PDF, don't think that that itself can be annotated then and there and then you don't write anything. That doesn't help. Notes by topic will be useful rather than author. Okay, so you might think of having an interesting book, and there are nowadays very interesting books. So you can also have Word document where you'll say, okay, every time I'm reading something on section 3, I'm going to write on this paper, on this file. Every time I come across something to do with, moral panic, I'm going to write here. Every time I'm reading something on smartphones, I'm going to write here. So you can think of your research topic, or let's say your PhD research or your research interests, and identify all the keywords that you're interested in. Create files with those keywords, okay? And when you're reading articles that have links to those keywords, try and write notes into those keywords, okay? So those files have only articles that you have read that refer to that particular subject matter, okay? So later, when you want to write something, or somebody gives you a topic for lecture, and they'll say, please speak on this, then you have this interesting way where you can make connections reading all that literature that you have. And maybe you can use that to then write another paper which you'd like to publish. So notes by topic will be useful rather than author, but you definitely need to write which author's paper has triggered your ideas and make references to that paper based on which you're making these notes, okay? And get your references right. So when you're making references to authors, don't randomly write Lingam 2018 or Deb 2013, because you'll wonder which article was this, when did I go through this, I can't remember. And research scholars spend 6 months when they have to submit their thesis going back to looking for their references. Yeah, they lose out a lot of time. Sometimes when they can't find something, they just want to drop those references. But if those are the most important references which have given them the best of quotes in their dissertation, they can't be dropping them. Yeah. So you need to make sure that you write your references properly, completely. Whatever is the writing style, manual style that your university approves, whether it is Chicago, whether it's APA, or whether it's Harvard, whatever is the style, you follow that style and you save your references as per that citation style. Similarly, when you write notes, don't write cryptic sentences. And I think when I read your annotations, I'm going to give you feedback on the sentences that you form. Students will write references and they will say, annotations, and they'll say, this paper has covered reproductive health issues of tribal women in Orissa. The paper has covered 300 women who have been studied in the year 2015-16, and the paper has interesting observations on family planning, beliefs and practices. That's it. It stops there. So then my question would be, what methodology have they used to do this study? Okay. What do you mean when you say reproductive health? Which aspect of reproductive health has the paper actually covered? So it means when you're writing notes, it has to be clear enough in every aspect of what the paper has covered, right? So if you are writing to yourself cryptic notes, you can't remember what is there in that paper by reading that. You have to go back again to read the paper because your notes are not sufficient. They are not good enough. Okay? It's like when people keep forgetting something, they'll say, okay, let me write it on a piece of paper so that I won't forget, right? But they won't remember where they kept that paper. So how will they find what they have to remember? Because they can't remember where they kept the paper. But if you say that every time I'm forgetting, so I'm going to write in this book and I'm going to keep this book in this drawer. So when I have to remember something, I know that I have to go to that drawer and I have to open that book and find what I have written there, right? So it means for you to recover and retrieve something, you should have done a job that is so good that you can actually retrieve. If you go there and still can't find something, it means you go back to reading the original, which you have read 4 years back, 3 years back, at a time when you have to finalize your chapters. So don't fool around with what you write. Right? Be honest. Don't completely paraphrase everything that's there in the paper. But you should be able to write something which is concise but very clear and clarifies all the key aspects of the paper which is important for you when you are writing your literature review chapter, or you're writing your discussion chapter, or you're writing your research paper. Write what is important of this paper and how is it connected to your research, right? So there are two clear aspects. One is what is about that research, and two, in what ways is it connected to your work? In what way is it helping you to now take off to think about your research? Both these become important when you are doing your notes taking. Check the reference list or bibliography of the article that you're reading. And this becomes very important in order to assess the quality of the paper. In the sense, you pick up a bad quality research paper and then you are reading that paper. And when you're looking for references of that paper, you'll find lots of links to, blogs, lots of links to some HTML files, etc. And they're not links to published papers. Then actually you shouldn't be spending so much time reading that paper. Okay, it's okay if you read that to just see what kind of observations are coming up, but that can't be qualified. That can't qualify as a refereed paper as part of your research paper or your dissertation. So what is important is that you need to read papers that are from reputed journals, that are from peer-reviewed journals, that are journals that are part of the UGC list. Okay, we find there are several journals which are called predatory journals. These are not really good journals. You will get minimum 10 mails every day asking you to submit a paper, and they'll say this is going to be in a Scopus journal and we are going to publish it. Similarly, you will get invitations to conferences where they will say that this is a conference on environment, development, sustainable agriculture, climate change. They'll put 5 different terminologies and say this is a conference and your paper is going to be published in a reputed journal which is under Scopus. Now all these are bogus. Okay, like you will get emails saying, or at least I get emails saying, you know, I want to nominate you for getting all my property. Okay, this email saying, I'm a Nigerian widow, my husband is giving away, I don't know how many zeros after those numbers, that many $1 billion, and I find you the most authentic person to get this property. Please reply. Okay. Similarly, you have emails about publishing in journals, Scopus journals. Please, all these are predatory journals. They'll ask you to pay you a lot of money. Okay. There are many journals that are of repute, which are also asking for money. And that's a different thing. We'll talk about it one of these days. But journals that entice you by saying we're going to publish it in 2 months. You know, there are many book publishers we always refer to them as Daryaganj publishers. Okay, Delhi, Daryaganj has so many publishers, like every pawn shop is one publishing house. Okay, and they will tell you as soon as your dissertation is submitted, they find it from InflipNet or from Shodh Ganga, they'll write to you saying, we'll publish your dissertation into a thesis. And once you say, okay, please publish, they'll ask you to give money. They'll publish 10, 15, 20 copies. They'll give you 10 copies and that's it. They earn money. So you will think that you published a paper, book for that matter, but actually these are not recognized by anybody. Okay, you have to have ISSN, ISBN numbers. These have to be reputed publishers. So don't all kinds of research papers that you come across, because in your Google search those papers came up. Okay, so verifying the authenticity of the papers that you're reading is very important. Yeah, as much as it is important for you to verify where you want to publish, you also have to verify what papers you're reading and whether those papers are of any value for you to read at all. And the biggest giveaway is their references. Okay, what references do they have? Are they referring papers that are coming from well-known sources and of well-known authors, or are those dubious kind? And there's also something, when we do plagiarism, I'll talk to you about. There's something also called self-plagiarism. Okay, people also do a lot of self-citations. Means out of 10 citations in that article, if 5 or 6 citations are of the author, then that is not considered to be an acceptable standard paper, because the person is just promoting his or her own work as reference to his or her own paper, right? That doesn't work. So you can just take that paper if you or photocopy it and just put it in the nearest dustbin, or use the backside if it is black and write something on it. Okay, so don't make it part of your reference list or bibliography. Next important tip is, how do you decide when to paraphrase when you're reading something and when to quote? Okay, because when you're reading something, you find everything that the person has written so suitable and so good. You will feel that, why should I write again? You know, I remember I had one PhD friend when I was doing PhD saying that, you know, in science and technology, there's a very clear understanding that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So if that is the understanding, why do I have to spend time writing all over again when somebody else has written so well? I can just take it as it is. Okay. Now that clearly comes under plagiarism. So you can't take somebody else's text and pass it off as your text. But when you're making notes, you paraphrase it in a way that it's not just turning those sentences little bit here and there, but more or less keeps the same structure. That also doesn't work. So you make a decision, something that's so much core of that person's statement in that paper, you take that as a quote. Okay, and that becomes the key for that paper. Okay, and therefore every time you read anything about that paper, it's that quote that keeps coming up. because that's the core of that person's statement in a 15-page article. So you should be able to look at what is the core of that paper, which is quotable. Not all papers are quotable. So only if it's quotable, you take quotes. Again, when you're taking quotes and making, writing it down as part of your notes or typing it up, supposing there is a quote that you take from page 25 and it's also running into page 26. So make sure that you write 25, and when it's continuing into 26, make sure that you also write 26. Okay, because when you're writing it into your dissertation, you should write then 25-26, right? That level of precision you must have when you're writing. So your notes taking should be as precise, as close to what you have read in the original. So as a researcher, you need to continuously make decisions about writing a summary, paraphrasing. When do you write a summary? When do you write a paraphrase? When do you take a quotation from a paper? However, you should not paraphrase extensively. That almost becomes like another paper. So you read a 12-page article and then you have a 6-page notes. Then that's like you have paraphrased the entire 12-page into 6-page. That won't qualify then for yourself as notes. Of course, they're very detailed, but can you have 50% of the paper written up by you as your notes? How? It has to be definitely more concise. It can't be so extensive. So in a nutshell, to sum up about notes taking helps in building in a discipline of writing. Okay? It gives you continuously a discipline that you're reading something and you're digesting it, you're processing it, and you're expressing in your words. It also helps you recall. Something that you have written, you will remember very well. Okay? It helps in recall. It also shapes your understanding. Okay? Because when you read and you're comprehending, you're processing, you're writing, you're also thinking about how is this paper different from the other paper that I read? Okay, what is it that person has done, has come up with different conclusions, and why is it this person has come up with different conclusions? So for you to make that kind of compare and contrast, it will be useful for you to have notes which will you read both through and then you start seeing what are the differences between both these papers. Okay, so it will help you recall and also shape your understanding and build your perspective on the issue. Okay, you get greater clarity about how do you understand a particular subject matter that you are working on based on all the different readings that you have. Okay, so that kind of summarization is important for you in your mind. So if you were to meet your research supervisor and say that I have read 10 research articles and they're very interesting and I'm getting a sense of what the field like, and then if your research supervisor says, so can you tell me what is it you read in these 10 papers? You're not going to say, Amartya Sen said this, Veena Sen, said this, Geeta Sen said this, Padmini Swaminathan said. You can't do author by author, right? You should be able to give a kind of overarching picture of what these 5 or 10 papers doing. Are they telling you something about differences that emerge because of rural-urban differences? Are they telling you something about variations because of the educational levels of individuals? Are they telling you something about the differences that emerge because of the kind of policies that are different in each of these locations? So you should be able to grasp from all that to be able to abstract all these key points. Those abstractions that you're drawing are basically being pegged on variables, indicators. So all these points about employment pattern, educational level, rural, urban, different policies, different years, are all the different variables that are there in all these papers. That is what is going to become the basis on which you're going to organize all the literature that you have. So reading through papers also gives you these thematic, constellations. around which you're going to place all your papers, which are going to be your bunches that you're going to review and write up. Okay, your notes are already done in those ways, and then you can also organize all your material around those ideas and then be able to write your chapter or write your review paper or write your research paper. So this is where I stopped this PPT. So, okay, elements of writing, I think about elements of reading is what we have done. Elements of writing is the last slide, and then we stop and we open for discussion. So when you write, somebody has asked a question about English. There are many more aspects of writing beyond English. So one is clear writing, in the sense a very reader-friendly way of being able to write becomes very important. That is, clarity in the point that the paper is making is very important. For PhD students, who is their audience? You know, most universities send their dissertations to 2 people or 3 people. So definitely those are the clear 3 audience they have. Plus they have their own research supervisor, who is the other audience who is going to read and give feedback. And many universities also have doctoral advisory committees. So there will be at least another 2-3 people who will be reading. And you will have a synopsis presentation within the university, for which there might be an an internal person from the university who plays the role of an external. So let's say in all you will have about 6 or 8 people who read the dissertation other than you. So how friendly is your dissertation, which is very clear, well written, well laid out, and also is not confusing and all over the place, right? And when you write a research paper, definitely again you have reviewers who first read your paper. You'll have several gatekeeping. The editor will be the first person to go through the paper and see whether the paper can be sent for further processing for reviewers to look at it. Then reviewers will look at it, and if they think this paper is good and can be accepted, of course they'll have many accept as is, accept with a lot of comments that need to be looked into, or come back with revisions, and we will go through another process of blind review. So there could be many outcomes of any submission, but clear, well laid out papers often have greater possibilities of moving towards getting reviewed rather than getting rejected at the editor's level. You definitely have to organize your paper very well, and it has to be logically organized. And even if you were to reflect on how I made this presentation, to start with, I have spoken about the broader context. So it means I have spoken about the general, and then I have come down to the particular. So the last slides are giving you tips on how to read and how to write, which are particulars. But where did we start? We started in the post-truth. We started about information overload. So we started general, and I've come down to particular. So either you start in general and come to particular, or you start at particular and you go to general. So there are people who start research papers by giving a small case study, of a village girl, or small case study of an entrepreneur, and then open up the entire discussion on larger issues around girls' education or about entrepreneurship or about livelihoods. So you need to make a decision whether you're going to start with general and go into particular, or going to start with particular and go into general. But when you're talking about general, and in most of the social sciences, you can't start an article saying from millions of years, man has always been a social being. You cannot start an article, research paper with those kind of generals. Those are like mega generals which don't make any and of no relevance. So you make a distinction between an essay and a research paper. Okay, I'll talk to you about some point, maybe after I finish this presentation during our I can talk to you about how do you make a distinction between an essay and a research paper. So your generals cannot be too bombastically general, and your particular cannot be too minuscule, like starting with me and then going to the world. No, you need to calibrate what is the right way of beginning a paper. but all papers have to be organized where the chronology is very clear. It's building from clearly one to the other. And that's also true for anything. Sentence, how is it linked to the next sentence? You know, if each of your sentence is standing on its own, then there is no connection between those sentences. Okay. So when I give you input on your concept notes, I will give you input on where, in how many cases you seem to be really having sentences independent of the other. Definitely your paper should be persuasive, okay? Which is how the arguments are built with the help of evidences. So persuasiveness is not about serious obedience or, you know, please, please. It's about with how much of clarity you're able to put forward your arguments with all the right evidences, whether it is statistics, whether it's data, or whether it's other citations, right? And then yours, and the connections that you're making, and whatever is the hypothesis that you have. Sometimes you might have a hypothesis that you're attempting to look at, or you might have a research question that you're actually posing. Recently, we've written a paper which is coming in an international journal, where we looked at during COVID-19, if everybody is expected to maintain physical distance, if everybody is supposed to be indoors, you know, locked down indoors and not being moving around in the public domain, um, is it possible for everybody to be within a lockdown situation? I mean, we're not talking about people who are in essential services. We are talking about large majority of people who don't have enough income, who don't have enough savings, who don't have a shelter on their head, who don't have water to keep washing their hands, who don't have their own bathroom and toilet in the house, right? So we actually used NSSO data and tried to establish how do you deal with issues of physical distancing within an existing context of social inequalities. Okay, so that's an interesting paper, and we are arguing that public health measures have not been in place for the longest time in the country. And unless the public health measures are addressed, to expect that 100% of the population is going to maintain physical distancing is really, something that cannot be achieved. And we tried to show how transmission rates go up because physical distancing is not possible. Yeah, Bombay, just look at Bombay, numbers of figures that we have here, because the density of the population is very high and every home has several people living together, and at least 100 people will share one toilet, and therefore there's very high chances of infections getting transmitted. Okay, so it means if the country has not dealt with social inequalities earlier, now it has come back to bite us. Okay, so we argued this out in the paper. So to argue that out, we need to have all the right arguments. So we did that. The paper is going to be published very soon. So your paper has to be persuasive and addressing something very, very relevant and linked to very important arguments that are already there, and you in a way align and tell that yes, this is something that we think should be done. Especially in social sciences, since a lot of our research has to be, that's the last point. How valuable is your research? You know, what's your social relevance? What is the social relevance of your research? So what is being written has to lead to some value addition to the knowledge. So is it socially relevant? Is it ethical and methodologically reliable and valid? Okay. So if you write something and want to publish purely on the basis of reading, you know, other people's literature, that's still acceptable. But how you actually identify your sources, how you actually identify what you're going to put together, what sources are you going to include, what sources you're going to exclude, a lot of this has to be made very clear. You have your own data, then you know you're on a much better footing. But how did you get that data? How did you do that research? How methodologically sound was your research? All that becomes very important. So to be able to write good research papers, if we were to, sum it up, to be able to write good research papers, you definitely need to read very well and read extensively. Okay? To be able to write something that's original and going to be contributing, it should emerge from research that you have done yourself. Okay? To be able to do research all by yourself, again, requires you to write good research proposals or carry out your own research in a very rigorous manner that nobody can question you on any of the major stages of your research, whether it's to do with the review of literature, whether it's to do with the statement of your research problem, your research questions, your research hypothesis, your statistical, your methodology, your sampling technique, your data, your analysis, your interpretation, and your conclusions, right? So there has to be a lot of rigor and clarity and consistency in all these stages of your research. And that's when you really will be confident to write research papers and also publish, because you know the domain very well, you know your own content very well, and you know where you can intervene, because you developed your research by asking a research question, which is not being asked so far or not being asked sufficiently within the domain, knowledge domain. So your research contributes to answering that research question, which is what will enable you to write a research paper, right? If you have not asked questions, you don't know what to write. Okay, you don't know what to write and publish. So that's where the problem lies. So I'll stop here and we'll remove. Thank you very much.
There is a question which says that are there do's and don'ts when a researcher read a research papers, an article online or through tab computer only?
First of all, you need to look at whether that's an authentic journal from where you got that paper, and whether that particular journal does peer reviewing. So that's what they use, the word peer reviewed journal. It means there is something called blindfolding, means the person who is reading your paper, at least 2-3 people will read your paper without really knowing who has written the paper. Okay, so even though I'm a very senior professor, in a research paper that I send to a journal, my name will not be there anywhere. Okay. Number two, I cannot keep giving references to my work in that paper, which will in a way be a giveaway. Means the person who is reading can make out, okay, because I will say I, and then I have a reference at the bottom, which means insidiously I have introduced who is the person who wrote the paper. So as per the norms of journals, you're not supposed to put out even your own self-authored papers in the reference list. So you need to look at what is the quality standards of the journal. And so you clearly would know, as sir also mentioned, Sage journals, Springer journals, Routledge journals, Taylor and Francis journals. So I will later tell you, because we have 2.5 days, later tell you how do you go about identifying the right journals for your field. Okay, I will take that session up. So make sure that you identify what are the key journals for your discipline and make sure that you're following them regularly. Okay, and since it's all e-copy, very quickly online you'll start seeing these papers. I'll also tell you sites where, though there are paywalls, in the sense you will find an abstract, you will think this is a very good paper. When you click on that, they'll say, please pay $30 for 1 week and $50 if you want to download. I will tell you how you can get the paper still. Okay, whether you write to the author, or there are also sites where you can put the DOI, that is the digital indicator, or that particular, every document has a DOI code. You put that and you will be able to download the article. Okay, so it's not something I can put in a PPT, but I put it in the chat and you can copy it. Okay, so I will share that. So the do's and don'ts are more about, as I mentioned, make notes. Yeah, do write your notes, keep a record of what you've written, and also write what are the observations that you find useful for your research. Okay, these are the things that you have to do. But whether you read on the computer, whether you read a printout, whether you read a Xerox copy is not a problem. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am, could you speak a little bit about reference management? Reference management.
What exactly do you have in mind when you say reference management?
Say whatever the papers and the books that I'm studying, I'm reading. When I want to put them all into my paper, so exactly what happens generally is there are some which are in hard copies, some in soft format. So how to keep them all together? Sometimes I forget which book I referred to. These things, how to do it in a simple way? Is there a good way how to do it?
See, one thing is there are several softwares. See, if you were to read any paper online, maybe tomorrow I'll do a screenshot and put it in the PPT. You will see that they will ask you if you want to export the citation. Okay, it will have a link there saying you want to export the citation. So the link then will say ProCite, EndNotes, Zotero, etc. So there are many softwares. If you are continuously online, because you need an online link for that, then if you click on that, what happens is the citation goes and stays there. Okay, so you create your own library of all the resources that you are using. And when you're writing a paper, you have to just keep clicking those, I'm also yet to use those softwares, but when you click on that, then actually you don't have to manually write your references when you do your paper. Okay, supposing I'm using 2015 and I'm using Lingam 2016, when I type that in the and put it within brackets, I can click on that and ask it to link to my library, okay, to my Zotero library, EndNotes library, or ProCite library. Then automatically it will start compiling them in that alphabetical order. Okay, so that's a very actually abroad, all research scholars are given training on how to prepare their bibliographies and how to do their reference.
Thank you, ma'am. There's another two questions which I'll read out. What is the difference between literature review and review of related studies?
A lot of this is wordplay. Okay, literature review is the word that's used by universities as part of their format for thesis. They will say you must have an introduction, you must have a review of literature, you must have a theoretical chapter, then you must have your methods chapter. They give you an entire list of what you must have as part of the standard format. However, when you write books, they don't accept this kind of format. They will want it to be more iterative rather than this kind of structure. When you say review of related studies, see, very often it is like, as I told you, an iterative process. When I'm reading something, suddenly I'll find there will be one link, especially online, you will see, they will say the Global Poverty Report released recently has said that the largest percentage of poor of the world live in India, right? And there will be a link to that report. So my immediate interest would be to click on that report and go and look at that report and see what kind of data did they use for India, etc. The downloadable report and whether I can download it, right? So if I have read the Global Poverty Report or if I have read the Global Hunger Index while I'm writing something on physical distancing, then it's definitely related but not directly relevant for me in this paper. Okay, so you do what is called as lateral reading. You are little all over the place, but you start developing good clarity about a variety of things that it's important for you to know, right? For example, if your research is in rural development, but if you've not read anything on poverty, somebody will say, how can you talk about rural development and agriculture without talking about rural poverty? Okay, so rural poverty is an extremely important subset of anything to do with rural development. So you need to understand for your topic what are all the most important aspects which are immediately important, and what are the others which are in the second circle, which are important for you to know but not directly important at this point of time. So in that sense, you do a lot of related reading. Okay, sometimes somebody will say that, when you're looking at the response to COVID now, it's important to know that there was a very similar response during colonial times. And you'll say, oh, what was it in the colonial time that happened? Then you know that there was one in 1896 that was called the Spanish flu. Then there was the bubonic plague that took place in 1912. Then what did the Britishers do at that time? Right? They also did things like quarantining people, putting stamps on their head, beating up people, things like that. And you will say, oh my God, look at the parallels between then and now. So I have done a lot of related reading on what has happened during colonial times when pandemics took place, right? So that's a related reading that will not directly come if I'm not doing anything on a colonial trajectory. So in your literature review, if you don't have a colonial trajectory of pandemics, it won't come. But if you have a timeline to looking at your literature, that will come. So what doesn't come into your review of literature according to you then becomes a related reading, which is important for you, but it's not showing up in your literature review chapter. That builds your scholarly abilities. Okay, may not turn into your document, but it builds your knowledge. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take the next question, ma'am. It says that sometimes going through the research paper, it seems everything is relevant. What we can leave and what we can keep. This is what is the question which the scholar wants to ask.
Yeah.
That when they're sometimes going through the research paper, it seems that everything is relevant from the scope of the study. Please suggest how to avoid that, what you should leave and what you should take.
See, the most important thing is you should look at what is the research question the researcher is asking in any paper. Every paper will have something very important that they are asking. Okay, for example, if you're looking at a paper that is being written on a midday meal scheme. Okay, so the paper might talk about midday meal scheme, that might talk about child malnutrition, but they're actually asking, has this midday meal scheme that is being run for the past 5 years in this village in Bhagalpur, has it improved the nutrition levels of children in a primary school? Okay, improved, when you use a word improved, it means earlier they must be having data of an earlier time when it was at a lower level. So there's a baseline data, and they would do a study now to look at whether there is an improvement in the nutrition levels of children. So the paper might have a question saying, does the midday meal scheme indeed improve the nutrition levels of children? Okay, so that's the question. So you need to capture, when you read the introduction, what is the key question the author is trying to pose and answer. Hold on to that. Then your next go about.
Yes, ma'am. The next question.
No, I'm not done. So the next part is you need to look at what is the methodology they have used to answer this question. Okay, look in the paper, what is the methodology they've used. Next, you have to look at what kind of sampling methodology they have used. Because you're a researcher, methodology is important. You need to look for what methodologies have they used. Then, what are the key observations the paper has? And what are the key conclusions the paper has? These are the highlights. Everything else is part of the story. Okay? When you go to eat, a dinner, you're invited to have dinner somewhere, and when you come back, somebody says, how was the dinner? You won't say, first I ate salad, then I went and had 4 rotis. You don't do all that, right? You will say that, they had fantastic ambience, they had very nice hospitality, everybody was received very well. They had 4 different kinds of cuisines that they were offering, and all the food was tasty, right? So what did you do? You only picked up the most salient points of that dinner experience. You didn't tell that you wore a sari, you walked 10, you took a bus and train. You won't tell all that. So similarly, when you're doing your notes taking from a paper, while everything looks very interesting, as a researcher, these are the key things that you pick up and make your notes. Okay? Any related observations that you see in that paper, you make separate notes that this paper seems to be also talking about, studies that were done on children with disabilities and their nutrition. They seem to be also talking about other states. So you go and look at the cross references. What other states studies have they quoted? So on and so forth. Okay. So from, every time you read a paper, you will actually be observing different things depending on what you're writing. Okay. Let me give you an example. Supposing you want to buy footwear, okay, and you keep traveling every day from point A to, and you sit in a window seat, okay, and when you sit in a window seat and you're traveling from point A to point B, the bus goes through a particular dense market, okay. Every day you will be looking at the market, but that day, because now you want to buy footwear, you will keep looking for where are all the jute ka dukan in that road, right? And you will actually see there are 4 jute ka dukan which you have never seen before. And you'll say, okay, tomorrow when I come, I want to check out these 4. Okay. At other times, you never thought of buying footwear, so you never noticed those shops, right? Similarly, you will see that when you lose your key and you have to find a key maker, you will ask people, where do I get this key maker? They will say, oh, he sits right beside that bus stop. And probably every day you're standing at that bus stop and you never saw the key maker because that was not your priority. Today it's your priority, so you'll go and look at that. Okay, so it means every time you read a research paper, depending on what you're looking for, you will start looking for that in that paper. Okay, so if you ask that researcher, is this what you wanted to emphasize? Sometimes they'll say, oh, really, I was looking at something else, or I was pointing out something else, kind of thing, So don't think that when you've read a paper and made notes, that's the end of the day. You may want to look at that paper again later for a different purpose altogether. Sometimes you might have to look for findings. Sometimes you might be looking at that paper for the methodology. Sometimes you might be looking at that paper for their description of the context where the research was done. You will do it for different times, for different reasons, different objectives, but the paper will be the same. तो आपका जो market है वो एक ही market है, पर हर बार every time you're going through that market, you will be looking for different things at different times. Okay, so all that is required is basic sharpness to ask a question, what am I looking for? Okay, once you have that clarity, you will know how to look for what you're looking for in a paper. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Can I take the next one, ma'am?
Yeah.
When we are in the process of writing, which involves lot of literary reading, how do you easily screen out Scopus listed journals?
Whichever article you have got, no. There is also this interesting thing where some journals are actually, but they are fairly new. Okay, then they don't come under Scopus. Okay, so you can, before you, like when you publish, you look at a paper whether it's under Scopus or not. Similarly, when you look for a good paper, it doesn't really matter, whether it's Scopus or not, particularly if it's coming from reputed journals, because they have to go through at least 2-3 years before they come into the list of Scopus journals. Okay, so it doesn't mean that these articles are old. Okay, So you make a distinction looking at who is the publisher of that particular journal, and then you can decide whether it's a repute or not. You can do a quick net search and then go ahead reading that article.
Thank you, ma'am. And next question is also related to the same. How much time should one ideally take to make notes from articles and books?
It's not so much about time. It's about whether you really grasped it well and you've written it up. Okay, so if you can write, it might take you just a matter of half an hour. If you are a person who takes longer time to write, you might take 2-3 hours. But it's not so much about the time, but it's about the comprehensiveness and also the conciseness with which you make your notes.
Yeah. Ma'am, the next one is what type of paper you should publish, whether it should be theoretical or empirical?
Depends on what is your strength, okay? And also depends on what is your research trying to do. If you are from the philosophical traditions, then you're more likely to do a theory paper, which is very theoretical, abstract, and philosophical. Whereas if you are a person who's done a quantitative research or qualitative research, then you're more likely to do an empirical paper. Okay, most youngsters are likely to do empirical papers and less likely to do theoretical papers. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the last question, ma'am. All the time statistics is necessary while writing a paper?
It depends on what kind of paper you're writing. Okay, so if you have a paper that's trying to establish a relationship, establish an association, establish a correlation, and you're talking in terms of, you know, numbers, majority and large percentage, etc., then definitely you need to have data and you need to show statistics. If you're talking in terms of you know, perspectives, experiences, or so on and so forth, then there's no data there. Okay, so it depends on what kind of research material you have based on which you're writing a paper. Okay, so let me give an example. See, right now I have short hair, okay, and it's all gray, right? So if I want to have a hairstyle, what kind of hairstyle can I have? I have short hair. This is my given. With this given, I need to think of what hairstyle I can have. I can't think of having a big long choti, etc. But if I have a lot of hair, then I can decide on what I want to do with that. So what you want to do, you know, if you have idli ka atta, you have idli batter, you can make idli or you can make dosa, right? But if you have idli batter, you can't make a chapati. With chapati flour, you can't make idli. So what you can write is linked to what you have as your research material. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, while we write paper, do we have to be conscious of using jargons, ma'am?
No, you're not supposed to use jargon. You're supposed to use concepts.
Okay.
You can't use jargon because jargon has many meanings, right? So you can't use jargon. You have to use concepts.
Concepts. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Sincerely, ma'am. Thank you very much for the session.